My son-in-law looked at me from the head of the boardroom table and said, effective immediately, your services as founder are no longer required. He had the votes. He had the title. What he didn't have was the deed, because the building housing his new empire didn't belong to the company. It belonged to me, and the lease gave me just 30 days to take it all back. I am Robert Shaw. For 32 years, I built Shaw Precision Manufacturing from a garage workshop into a $70 million enterprise. I thought my succession plan was bulletproof. I brought my son-in-law, David, into the business, groomed him, and handed him the presidency. What I never planned for was his first official act being my very public removal. Now, the board thinks he holds all the power. But in 1 week, when they receive my notice to vacate, they will learn a brutal lesson in corporate control. I started this company in 1992 with a second mortgage and a belief that American manufacturing wasn't dead, just sleeping. My wife Alina handled the books from our kitchen table while I ran a CNC machine in a 1,200 square foot rented bay. We made precision components for the aerospace industry, one part at a time, one client at a time. By 2003, we employed 47 people and moved into our own 50,000 square foot facility. That facility, the one David just claimed as his corporate headquarters, was the first major asset I ever placed into a trust. You see, I'd seen other founders make the classic mistake. They put everything, the intellectual property, the equipment, the real estate, into the corporate entity. Then, when succession talks got tough, or a partner wanted out, or a lawsuit hit, the entire empire was vulnerable. A single point of failure. I wasn't having it. So in 2005, I created the Shaw Family Legacy Trust. And the very first asset I transferred into, it was the land and the building at 1400 Industrial Parkway. The company would operate as a tenant. It was a clean, arm's-length arrangement. Smart estate planning, my attorney said. A control mechanism I knew. For 20 years, Shaw Precision Manufacturing paid rent to the Shaw Family Legacy Trust. On paper, it was a business expense. In reality, it was the silent heartbeat of my control. The lease was standard, a 10-year term with automatic 5-year renewals. But it contained one clause, Clause 17B, that almost no one ever reads. It stated that in the event of a fundamental change in company control or leadership, not approved in writing by the landlord, that's me, as trustee, the landlord retained the right to terminate the lease with 30 days written notice. I didn't draft it to be vengeful. I drafted it to be safe. I thought it would protect the company from a hostile takeover by a private equity firm. I never imagined I'd need it to protect the company from my own family. My daughter Chloe was never interested in the gritty details of milling and lathing. Her passion was graphic design. She met David Caldwell in 2015. He was sharp, ambitious, with an MBA and a background in operational efficiency at a larger rival firm. I saw his hunger. When he and Chloe married 2 years later, I saw an opportunity. Here was a capable, driven executive who was now family. The perfect successor, or so I believed. I brought David in as vice president of operations. He was good. He streamlined workflows, renegotiated supplier contracts, and boosted our margins. I was proud. I began the slow, deliberate process of stepping back. I promoted him to Chief Operating Officer, then to President. I gave him a seat on the board. I introduced him to our most important clients as the future of Shaw Precision. I was doing everything the succession planning articles said to do. I was letting go of responsibility. I was letting go of authority. But letting go of control, that was a different matter entirely, and David sensed it. The friction started subtly. He'd make a strategic recommendation, say, to aggressively pursue automotive contracts, and I'd counter with the reasons we should stay focused on aerospace. He'd want to invest in a new, fully automated production line, and I'd argue for incremental upgrades to our existing machinery. To him, I was being a stubborn old man clinging to outdated methods. To me, I was protecting the company's core identity and managing risk. We were both right. And we were both wrong. The tension found its way home. Chloe would call, her voice tight, saying David felt undermined, that he couldn't lead if I was always looking over his shoulder. I told her he needed to earn my full confidence, that this was how it worked. I didn't see the coalition he was building. David is a persuasive man. He began taking other board members to lunch. Our board was mostly longtime advisors, our accountant, our corporate attorney, a retired banker who'd helped us secure early loans. They were loyal to me, but they were also pragmatists. David painted a picture for them. He showed them growth projections for the automotive sector. He presented analyses showing our competitors were modernizing faster. He spoke the language of shareholder value and market capitalization, concepts that resonated more than my stories of craftsmanship and legacy. He quietly suggested that my emotional attachment was becoming a liability, that for the company to reach its next chapter, it needed clean, unambiguous leadership. I was in the dark. I was too busy being the founder, believing the sheer weight of my history would keep the ship on course. The formal coup was set for a quarterly board meeting on March 15th. The agenda seemed routine. I arrived, as always, a few minutes early. David was already there, at the head of the table, a place he'd only recently started occupying. He didn't smile. The other board members avoided my eyes. That's when I felt the first cold trickle of dread. David called the meeting to order. He ran through the financials, which were strong. Then he cleared his throat. The final item, he said, is a matter of corporate governance. For Shaw Precision to thrive in a competitive landscape, it requires a leadership structure that is decisive and unified. The current bifurcation of influence between the founder's vision and the president's operational authority is creating strategic paralysis. He used words like bifurcation and paralysis. He sounded like a consultant's report. Then he looked directly at me. Therefore, after discussion with the board, I am proposing a resolution. Effective immediately, Robert Shaw's role as founder and senior advisor will be terminated. His seat on the board will be vacated. All operational and strategic decision-making will be consolidated under the office of the president. There was a silence you could drown in. I looked around the table. Our attorney, a man I'd known for 25 years, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The accountant studied his pen. The motion was seconded. The vote was unanimous. My own board, the men I'd chosen, had just fired me from the company I'd built from a sketch on a napkin. David's expression wasn't triumphant. It was calm, surgical. "Robert," he said, formal and final, "your services are no longer required. Security will escort you to collect your personal effects." That was the moment. The moment the foundation I thought was solid turned out to be built on sand. I stood up. My knees felt weak, but my mind, for the first time that morning, became perfectly, icily clear. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply looked back at David, at the head of my table in my building, and I said the only thing that came to me. "You're in charge now, David. I hope the view from the top is worth it." I walked out, a security guard trailing me like I was a thief. As I emptied my desk of a few family photos and a 30-year-old coffee mug, I didn't think about the humiliation. I didn't think about the betrayal. I thought about a filing cabinet in my home office. I thought about a document titled Commercial Lease Agreement. And I thought about Clause 17B. The drive home from the office that day was the longest of my life, but I wasn't driving toward an ending. I was driving toward a beginning. I walked into my home office, past the framed photos of company picnics and product launches, and I went straight to the fireproof safe. Inside were the documents that mattered: the trust agreement for the Shaw Family Legacy Trust and the executed commercial lease between the trust and Shaw Precision Manufacturing, Inc. I poured a whiskey neat, and I read Clause 17B aloud to the empty room. In the event of a fundamental change in company control or leadership not approved in writing by the landlord may terminate this lease upon 30 days written notice. The language was dry, legal, beautiful. David's action was the very definition of a fundamental change in leadership not approved by the landlord. The trigger had been pulled. All I had to do was send the notice. But this wasn't just a legal transaction. This was my life's work and my family. I sat there for hours, the weight of what came next settling on me. If I sent that notice, I wouldn't just be evicting a company. I would be evicting my daughter's husband. I would be potentially crippling the enterprise that employed 180 people, people with mortgages and car payments and kids in college. The moral calculus was dizzying. That night, Chloe called. Her voice was strained, trying to bridge a chasm. "Dad," David told me what happened. He said it was just business. that it was the only way to move forward. Did he tell you he had security escort me out like a disgraced employee? I asked, my voice quieter than I felt. She was silent for a moment. He said it was protocol to avoid a scene. Dad, he's under immense pressure. The board, they were pushing for clarity. The board I appointed, I said. Tell me, Chloe, did you know about this? The pause that followed was an answer in itself. It wasn't a long pause, just a half-second beat too long. He mentioned there might be changes. He didn't give me details. He said you'd understand it was for the good of the company. A cold clarity washed over me. My own daughter had been given a preview, however vague. She hadn't warned me. The alliance had already shifted. The family business was now just business. I do understand, Chloe, I said finally. I understand perfectly. I hung up and did the only thing I could do. I began to document. Just like the man in the original story with his spiral notebook, I opened a fresh legal pad. At the top, I wrote the date, March 15th. I wrote down every word I could remember from the board meeting. I listed the names of the board members who voted yes. I described the security guard. I noted the time I left the building. It was a mechanical process, and the mechanics kept me from crumbling. The next morning, I called my attorney, Margaret Vance. Margaret had set up the trust for me 20 years ago. She was in her 60s, fierce, and had the ethical compass of a naval navigator. I told her everything. She listened without interruption. Then she said, Robert, first, I'm sorry, this is brutal. Second, you're correct. Clause 17B is activated. The change in leadership was material, and you, as trustee, did not approve it. You have the right to terminate. But before we send a notice that will detonate like a financial bomb, we need to be surgical. We need to understand their next move. Her advice was to wait, to observe. Let them believe they've won cleanly, she said. Their overconfidence will show us their hand. So I waited. The silence from the company was deafening. My company email was deactivated. My phone access to the building security system was revoked. It was as if I had never existed. But I watched from the outside. Industry newsletters announced David Caldwell's promotion to Chief Executive Officer of Shaw Precision. A press release touted a new strategic vision and streamlined leadership. My name was mentioned once, in the past tense, building on the strong foundation laid by founder Robert Shaw. The erasure was methodical. A week after the coup, I received a formal letter from the company's new corporate counsel. It was a severance agreement. It offered 12 months of my former salary, continued health benefits for 2 years, and a non-disparagement clause. In exchange, I would release all claims against the company and its officers, including David, and affirmatively agree to the termination of my advisory role. It was a buyout of my silence. The cover letter was cordial, hoping I would accept this generous package and enjoy a well-earned retirement. Generous, it was a paycheck to go away quietly, to legitimize what they had done. I took the letter to Margaret. She read it and smiled a thin, humorless smile. This is perfect, she said. They've made a critical error. They're treating this as an employment termination. They are completely oblivious to the property issue. They don't know the building isn't theirs. Or they assume the lease is a formality they can renegotiate, I said. Either way, Margaret replied, their ignorance is our advantage. Do not respond to this. Silence is a weapon right now. The personal pressure began to mount, just as it did in the original story. Only instead of late-night knocks on the door, it was carefully orchestrated interventions. My brother, who had never worked a day in the company but had an opinion on everything, called. Bob, I hear there was a shake-up. David's a smart guy. Maybe it's time to pass the torch and relax. Don't make a fuss. An old friend from the Chamber of Commerce took me to lunch and spent 40 minutes talking about the importance of family harmony. The subtext was clear. I was being cast as the stubborn old founder who couldn't let go, while David was the dynamic savior. The narrative was being written around me. The hardest was Alina, my wife, the one who had been with me from the kitchen table ledger days. She passed away 8 years ago from cancer, but I found myself talking to her in the empty house, asking her what I should do. She was always the better strategist, the one who saw the human angles I missed. She would have known how to handle Chloe. She would have seen David's ambition for what it was, both a strength and a danger, and found a way to channel it. Without her, I felt like I was navigating with half a map. After 2 weeks of silence, David broke it himself. He came to my house on a Saturday afternoon. He came alone, no lawyers, no Chloe. He stood on my doorstep in a polo shirt and khakis, looking like a neighbor coming to borrow a tool. "Robert," he said, "can we talk?" I let him in. We sat in the living room. He didn't apologize. He framed it all as inevitability. The company was stagnating, he said, his hands spread in a gesture of reason. The board felt it. The market demands agility. Your legacy is secure, but your methods were from a different era. This wasn't personal. It was fiduciary. I listened. I said nothing. I wanted to hear him articulate the New World Order. He finally got to the point. "The severance agreement is more than fair. I urge you to sign it. It will give you financial security and allow us all to move on. A public fight helps no one. It hurts the company's valuation. It hurts the employees, and it will tear the family apart." There it was, the threat, wrapped in concern. It will tear the family apart. He was using my love for Chloe as leverage. He was betting that my desire to protect her from a war would outweigh my desire for justice or for control. I looked at him, this man who had married my daughter and now held my life's work in his hands. "David," I said, my voice steady, "you told me my services were no longer required. I heard you. Now you have the company, run it." He mistook my calm for surrender. He nodded, a look of satisfaction flickering across his face. "I'm glad we can be adult about this. Chloe will be relieved." After he left, I called Margaret. "It's time," I said. The following Monday, Margaret sent 2 letters by certified mail. The first was to David Caldwell in his capacity as CEO of Shaw Precision Manufacturing, Inc. The second was to the company's corporate counsel. The letters were identical. They were not severance negotiations. They were a notice of lease termination under Clause 17B. The language was precise. It cited the board action of March 15th as the triggering event. It stated that as trustee of the Shaw Family Legacy Trust, the landlord, I did not approve the change in leadership. Therefore, pursuant to the lease agreement, the tenancy was terminated. Shaw Precision Manufacturing, Inc. had 30 days until April 28th to vacate the premises at 1400 Industrial Parkway. Margaret also included a single, devastating attachment, a copy of the property deed, recorded with the county, showing the owner as the Shaw Family Legacy Trust, Robert Shaw, trustee. It was the proof they had never bothered to look for. The bomb was now in the air, and we waited for it to land. The reaction was not immediate. There was a 2-day silence. Then, on the 3rd day, my phone exploded. It started with the corporate counsel, a man named Peterson. His tone was a mixture of confusion and bluster. "Mr. Shaw, we've received this notice. There must be some misunderstanding. The company has occupied that building for 2 decades. We have a lease." "You have a lease that my trust just terminated," I said. "The reason is in the letter. We were never informed the building was in a trust. This is a material fact that was withheld." "It was in the lease you've been paying rent on for 20 years, I replied calmly. "The landlord is listed as the Shaw Family Legacy Trust. Your finance department has been writing checks to it every month. I suggest you look at your own records." The call ended abruptly. The next call was from David. This time, there was no polished CEO veneer. His voice was sharp, laced with a panic he was trying to control. "What is this, Robert? Is this a shakedown? You're going to evict your own company. This is insane." "It's not my company, David," I said. "You made that very clear. It's your company, and your company is a tenant in my building, a tenant whose lease has been terminated. You have 30 days to relocate." He sputtered. He argued about operational impossibility, about client contracts, about the millions in specialized machinery that couldn't be moved easily. He was talking logistics. I was talking law. "The notice is valid, David," I said, cutting him off. "All future communication should go through my attorney, Margaret Vance." Then came the call I had been dreading. Chloe, she was crying. "Dad, what did you do? David says you're trying to destroy the company. He says you're evicting everyone. Is that true? Chloe, listen to me, I said, my heart breaking at the sound of her tears. The company isn't being destroyed. It needs to find a new location. David removed me from the business. That action triggered a clause in the lease. This is the consequence. I didn't start this war, but I will finish it. You're finishing all of us, she shouted, and the line went dead. That night I didn't sleep. I replayed every decision. Had I been too harsh? Was I sacrificing my relationship with my only child on the altar of principle and property rights? The weight was suffocating. I was no longer just a wronged founder. I was a father who had just made his daughter choose between her husband and her dad. The following morning, Margaret called. Her voice was grim. They've lawyered up, big time. They've retained Franklin & Cole. Franklin & Cole was a heavyweight corporate litigation firm known for bare-knuckle tactics. This was no longer a family dispute. This was now a professional fight, and their opening move was a masterstroke of pressure. They didn't sue me, not yet. Instead, they sent a letter to every major client of Shaw Precision and to the local newspaper. The letter stated that due to unfounded and retaliatory actions by former founder Robert Shaw, the company was facing potential operational disruption. It assured clients that management is taking all necessary steps to resolve this matter and ensure continuity. They had made the fight public. They were painting me as a vengeful, unstable old man willing to sink the ship because he wasn't allowed to captain it anymore. The story ran in the business section with the headline, "Founders Feud Threatens Local Manufacturer." My photo, a smiling headshot from a company brochure years ago, was right next to it. The court of public opinion was now in session, and I was being cast as the villain. I sat in my kitchen, the newspaper spread out before me, feeling a profound isolation. David had the company, the narrative, and now, it seemed, the moral high ground. He had outmaneuvered me in the public sphere. My legal leverage, the building, was starting to look like a weapon of mass destruction, and I was the madman with his finger on the button. But then I remembered something, a detail. When the original story's protagonist was besieged, he had his documentation, his spiral notebook. I had my legal pad, and I had something else. I had 20 years of rent payments from the company to my trust. I had every signed board resolution approving the lease renewals, resolutions David himself had voted for as president. I had a paper trail that proved the company had always known who the true landlord was. Their claim of ignorance was a lie. Margaret confirmed it. Their public play is a gamble, she said. They're trying to pressure you into backing down by making you a pariah. But in a courtroom, facts beat publicity. We have the facts. Are you prepared to see this through, Robert, even if it means a very ugly, very public lawsuit? I looked out the window at the quiet street. This was no longer about getting my job back. That ship had sailed. This was about something more fundamental. It was about proving that actions have consequences, that you cannot orchestrate a betrayal and then claim victimhood when the betrayed party uses the rules you ignored to defend themselves. Yes, Margaret, I said, my voice firm for the first time in weeks. I'm prepared. Good, she replied, because they just filed. They're suing the trust for wrongful termination of the lease, tortious interference, and are seeking an injunction to stop the eviction. They want a judge to force us to let them stay. The hearing is in 14 days. The battle lines were now drawn in a court of law. David had thrown the first public punch. I had the deed to the building, and in 2 weeks, a judge would decide who really controlled the future of Shaw Precision. The 14 days before the injunction hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Franklin & Cole, David's new legal pit bulls, filed a barrage of motions. They subpoenaed my personal bank records. They deposed my accountant, trying to find any irregularity in the trust's management. They argued to the court that my termination notice was an act of pure vindictiveness that would cause irreparable harm to the company and the local economy. They even submitted an affidavit from the plant manager detailing the catastrophic and likely fatal impact of relocating the heavy machinery. The narrative was clear. I was a monster, and David was a heroic CEO trying to save jobs. Margaret was unfazed. They're throwing sand in the judge's eyes, she said. Our case is simple, contract law, They triggered a clause. We exercised a right. Everything else is noise. But the noise was deafening. The local news ran follow-up stories, interviewing anxious employees outside the plant gates. I saw a clip of a machinist I'd hired 20 years ago, his face lined with worry, saying, "I just don't understand why Mr. Shaw would do this to us." It felt like a knife twist. David had successfully reframed the entire conflict. It was no longer about a boardroom coup. It was about a founder's selfish revenge against his own employees. The personal siege intensified. I started getting hang-up calls in the middle of the night. A for sale sign appeared on my lawn one morning, which I promptly threw in the trash. The community I'd been a part of for 3 decades was now looking at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. I was the town pariah. 3 days before the hearing, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a single framed photograph. It was a picture of Alina and me, taken on the dock of a lake house we'd rented the summer before she got sick. We were both laughing. Someone had taken a red marker and drawn a crude X over her face. There was no note. It didn't need one. The message was clear. You have already lost what matters most. This fight will cost you what's left. I showed it to Margaret. For the first time, I saw a flicker of real anger in her eyes. This is intimidation. We could take this to the judge, but without a source, it's just theater. It's meant to rattle you. Don't let it. I placed the photo back in its frame, the red X hidden against the glass. I didn't feel rattled. I felt cold. The last vestiges of any familial obligation I felt toward David evaporated. This was no longer my son-in-law. This was an adversary. The day of the hearing arrived. The county courthouse was the same one from the original story, all marble and imposing silence. Margaret and I arrived early. David arrived with a phalanx of 3 lawyers from Franklin and Cole. He wore a tailored navy suit and avoided looking at me. Chloe was not there. Her absence was a louder statement than any she could have made. The judge was the Honorable Samuel Rivera. He had a reputation for being impatient with grandstanding. The hearing was not to decide the full lawsuit, but only whether to grant a preliminary injunction to stop my eviction until the full case could be tried, which could take years. David's lead attorney, a man named Carson with a voice like polished granite, went first. He painted a sweeping picture. He spoke of Robert Shaw's deep-seated resentment, his inability to let go, and his reckless decision to use a hidden technicality to hold the company hostage. He presented binders of evidence, the newspaper articles, the affidavits from employees, the economic impact report from a hired consultant claiming the move would cost $3 million and force layoffs. He argued the balance of harms heavily favored the company. The harm to me, he said, was merely financial, lost rent. The harm to the company, its employees, and the community was existential. He was good. He made it sound so reasonable, so tragic. Then it was Margaret's turn. She stood up, a single folder in her hand. She approached the bench with the calm of someone who knew the ground was solid beneath her feet. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about economics or hurt feelings. It is about a contract, a commercial lease freely entered into by sophisticated parties 20 years ago. My client as trustee is the landlord. Shaw Precision Manufacturing is the tenant. The lease contains a clear, unambiguous termination clause. That clause was triggered on March 15th when the tenants' board executed a fundamental change in leadership without the landlord's consent. My client exercised his contractual right. That is the beginning and the end of the legal analysis." Judge Rivera leaned forward. "Counselor, the opposing side argues your client's motive was vindictive, that this is a weaponization of a clause never intended for this purpose." "Your Honor, motive is irrelevant to contract enforcement," Margaret replied smoothly. "But if we must discuss motive, let's discuss the motive of the tenant. The tenant, led by Mr. Caldwell, executed a hostile removal of the founder, the very person who is also their landlord. They did so without a shred of due diligence regarding their tenancy. Their claim of irreparable harm is a direct result of their own reckless governance, not my client's lawful actions. They are not victims of a hidden clause. They are victims of their own profound negligence." She then opened her folder. "I have here the original lease, signed by Robert Shaw as trustee. I have the last 10 years of cancelled rent checks, all made payable to the Shaw Family Legacy Trust. I have board meeting minutes from 2010, 2015, and 2020, all unanimously approving the continuation of the lease terms. Minutes, Your Honor, that were voted on and approved by Mr. David Caldwell himself. She placed the documents on the clerk's desk. The tenant has always known who their landlord was. Their current claim of surprise is not just false, it is demonstrably false. They are asking this court to rescue them from the consequences of their own bad business decisions. That is not the function of an injunction. Judge Rivera took the documents. He spent 5 minutes reading in silence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the hum of the lights. He looked at Carson. Your client, Mr. Caldwell, voted to approve these lease minutes. Carson shifted. Your Honor, the focus of those votes was on the financial terms, not the ownership structure of the landlord entity. The minutes state the landlord is the Shaw Family Legacy Trust. Judge Rivera interrupted, his voice dry. Did your client read the minutes he was voting on? It was a devastating question. The foundation of David's entire "we didn't know" argument crumbled in an instant. The ruling came quickly. Judge Rivera denied the injunction. He found that the company had failed to prove a likelihood of success on the merits of their underlying case. He stated that the lease clause was clear, the triggering event was uncontested, and the landlord's right to terminate appeared valid. He was not swayed by the economic arguments. The hardship claimed by the tenant, he said, is of its own making. David's face turned ashen. His lawyers huddled around him, whispering urgently. As we walked out of the courtroom, Margaret allowed herself a small, tight smile. Phase 1 complete. They have 30 days, and now they're desperate. But desperate people do not give up. They escalate. 2 days after the hearing, I was served with new papers. This time, David and the board were not suing just to stop the eviction. They were suing me personally and the trust for breach of fiduciary duty. Their new, breathtaking argument was this. By placing the company's essential real estate in a separate trust, I had secretly enriched myself at the company's expense for 2 decades. They claimed the rent payments were excessive, a siphoning of corporate assets. They accused me of setting up a shadow governance structure designed to sabotage any future leadership that wasn't me. They were trying to reframe my prudent asset protection as a 20-year fraud. The lawsuit included a demand for a full forensic accounting of the trust and sought damages equal to all rent paid over 20 years, a sum totaling over $12 million. It was a nuclear counterattack. If they won, not only would they get to stay in the building, but I would be financially annihilated. When Margaret explained it, I felt the room tilt. They're turning my victory into a crime, I said, my voice hollow. They're trying to reframe the narrative entirely, she corrected. From vengeful founder to corporate embezzler. It's a high-risk strategy. To prove it, they'll have to prove the rent was not at fair market value. We have appraisals, we have comparables. But Robert, this changes the battlefield. This is now a war of attrition. They have the company's treasury to fund this. We have the trust's assets. This could bleed both sides dry. The pressure reached a new, unbearable peak. The local paper, now fully invested in the saga, ran the headline, "Former founder accused of diverting millions in new lawsuit." The court of public opinion, which had seen me as a villain, now saw me as a thief. Old friends stopped calling altogether. And then the call came from the one person whose opinion still shattered me. It was Chloe. She didn't cry this time. Her voice was flat, exhausted, final. "Dad, I'm filing for divorce." The words didn't register at first. What? David showed me the lawsuit, the numbers. He says you've been stealing from the company for my entire adult life. He says the trust was your escape hatch, your way of keeping control and profiting in secret. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I can't be in the middle of this. I can't have a child in the middle of this war. A child, the word hit me like a physical blow. Chloe, you're pregnant. 10 weeks, she said, a tiny crack in her voice, and I will not let my child be born into this toxic mess you and David have created. I'm leaving him, I'm leaving the company, I'm leaving town. I need you to stop, just stop. Sign whatever he wants. Give him the building, let it go, or you will never see your grandchild. She hung up. I stood there, the phone in my hand, the world reduced to a single searing point of pain. My daughter, my grandchild. They were the hostages now. David hadn't just attacked my company or my reputation. He had, perhaps unintentionally, weaponized the one thing I truly loved. And in her terror and confusion, Chloe was giving me an ultimatum: choose between my principal or my family's future. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. I paced. I stared at Alina's picture. I read the cruel red X over her face as a prophecy coming true. I was about to lose everything she and I had built in every sense. On the morning of the 3rd day, as the deadline to respond to the new lawsuit loomed, I made a decision. I called Margaret. "Margaret, I need you to draft a proposal, a settlement." There was a long pause on the other end. "Robert, after the injunction win, we have leverage. This new suit is a bluff. A costly, ugly bluff, but a bluff." "It's not about leverage anymore," I said, my voice thick with a fatigue that went down to the bone. "It's about my daughter. It's about my grandchild. I want you to draft a proposal. The company can buy the building from the trust. At fair market value, the proceeds go into the trust for Chloe's future and for the future of her child. In exchange, they drop all lawsuits. David gets his clean victory, I get out, and my family, what's left of it, has a chance to heal." It was surrender, a structured, dignified surrender, but surrender nonetheless. I was trading the last piece of my legacy for a chance at a future that included my daughter and my grandchild. The foundation I had built my life on, the company, the building, the trust, would be gone. But maybe, just maybe, a new foundation could be built from the ashes. Margaret, to her credit, did not argue. She heard the defeat in my voice. "I'll draft it," she said softly. "But Robert, are you sure? Once we send this, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I lied. The proposal was sent that afternoon. For 48 hours, there was no response. The silence was its own form of torture. Had I offered too much, too little? Was David so drunk on his own narrative of victory and victimhood that he would reject even this, wanting not just to win, but to destroy me completely? Then, on the evening of the 2nd day, my doorbell rang. It was not David, it was Chloe. She stood on my porch, alone, her eyes red but clear. She didn't say hello. She just held out her phone, the screen glowing in the twilight. "Read it," she said. It was an email from David to her, forwarded. The subject line was, "Final offer." My hands trembled as I took the phone. And as I read David's counter-proposal, the cold, calculating truth of the man my daughter had married finally laid itself bare. David's email wasn't a negotiation. It was a confession. He wrote to Chloe that my settlement offer was predictable and a sign of weakness. He told her he would counter with an offer to buy the building at 70% of its appraised value, citing the litigation risk and tenant instability as reasons for the discount. But the crucial paragraph, the one that changed everything, was this: "Once we own the asset free and clear, we can leverage it for the expansion capital we need. Your father's emotional attachment to bricks and mortar has held us back for years. This is the clean break. He gets some money, you and the baby get security, and I get to finally run the company without his ghost in the hallway." I read it twice, then I handed the phone back to Chloe. My hands had stopped shaking. A strange, electric calm settled over me. David had just put in writing that his goal was not to save the company, but to strip it of a key asset for his own expansion plans. He had admitted that removing me was about removing an obstacle, not about governance. And he had called my life's work a ghost. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady, "do you understand what this says?" She nodded, tears welling up again, but now they were tears of a different kind, of clarity, of disgust. "He's not trying to fix anything, he's just acquiring." "Come inside," I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Alina used to do the company books. I made tea. I showed Chloe everything, not just the lease and the trust documents, but my legal pad with the timeline, the severance letter, the framed photo with the red X. I showed her the court ruling denying the injunction. I walked her through the math of the rent, showing her the market comparables that proved it was fair, even slightly below average for the area. I showed her the board minutes David had signed. For 2 hours, I didn't plead my case, I just presented the evidence, the foundation, as I had always called it. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "He lied to me about all of it. He made me think you were trying to destroy us." I would never destroy what your mother and I built, I said. I was trying to protect it. Maybe I protected it the wrong way. Maybe keeping the building separate was a way of not letting go. But Chloe, it was never a secret. It was just a plan. A plan he never bothered to understand before he tried to take it all. She reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first time we had touched in months. What do we do now, Dad? We asterisk, the word was a lifeline. We fight, I said, but we fight smart, and we fight for the right thing. I called Margaret first thing the next morning. I read her David's email over the phone. I heard the sharp intake of breath on the other end. This is gold, Robert, she said, her voice crisp with renewed focus. This undercuts their entire narrative of fiduciary duty and good faith. This shows premeditation and a personal profit motive. We're not sending a counter-proposal. We're amending our response to their lawsuit to include this email as evidence of their bad faith. And we're filing a motion for sanctions against Franklin and Cole for pursuing a frivolous claim. The legal machinery, which had been grinding toward a costly stalemate, suddenly shifted into high gear. Margaret filed the motion. She attached David's email. The argument was simple. The plaintiffs were engaged in a strategic lawsuit against public participation, a SLAPP suit designed not to win on the merits, but to burden me with the cost of a defense until I surrendered. They were using the court system as a weapon of financial attrition, and now we had proof of their malicious intent. The effect was immediate. Franklin and Cole, facing potential sanctions and a major blow to their reputation, went into damage control. They requested a private settlement conference. The conference was held in a neutral attorney's office. David was there with Carson, his lead attorney. I was there with Margaret. Chloe, at her insistence, was also there. She sat beside me, not beside David. The temperature in the room was arctic. Carson opened. He tried to argue that the email was taken out of context, a private marital communication. Margaret didn't let him finish. Your client's state of mind is the entire context, she said. He admits the removal of my client was to eliminate a ghost, not to address governance. He admits his plan is to acquire the asset at a discount for expansion. This proves the breach of fiduciary duty claim is a retaliatory fiction. We will take this to the judge. We will seek sanctions, and we will win. Your choice is simple. Drop all claims with prejudice, or we will litigate this into the ground, and you will lose publicly and expensively. David stared at Chloe, his expression a mixture of betrayal and fury. You showed them, he hissed. She showed me the truth, Chloe said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room. It's over, David. The negotiation that followed was brutal, but its outcome was inevitable. The final settlement was signed 2 weeks later. Its terms were stark. 1. All lawsuits were dismissed with prejudice. David and the company released all claims against me and the trust. 2. The Shaw Family Legacy Trust would retain full ownership of the building at 1400 Industrial Parkway. 3. Shaw Precision Manufacturing, Inc. would vacate the premises within the original 30-day period. The eviction stood. 4. In a separate private agreement, Chloe used her personal shares, gifted to her by me over the years, to vote with my remaining proxy to remove David as CEO. The board, chastened by the legal debacle and the exposure of David's emails, did not fight it. He was offered a severance package and left the company. 5. The board requested that I return as interim CEO to stabilize the company during the relocation. I agreed on 2 conditions: that we find a new facility within 30 miles to retain our workforce, and that Chloe join the board. The company found a vacant warehouse in the next county. The move was chaotic and expensive, but not fatal. We retained 80% of our workforce. The foundation, though shaken, held. David moved to another state for a job at a private equity firm. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. It was not amicable, but it was clean. The final surprising detail came a year after the settlement. I was stepping down from the CEO role for good, having successfully transitioned the company to a professional manager from outside the family. At the final board meeting, where my resignation was formalized, Chloe put forward a new proposal. She proposed that the company enter into a new long-term lease with the Shaw Family Legacy Trust for the original building. The building, now empty, was being renovated into a multi-tenant industrial park. Our old company would be its anchor tenant, leasing a smaller, more efficient unit. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, Chloe handed me a set of blueprints. "I've been working with an architect," she said. "The north corner of the building, with the windows overlooking the old loading docks. We're making that the new headquarters for the Trust's management office, and there's a small, attached space for a founder's office, if you want it." I looked at the plans. She had drawn a little oak tree in the corner of the sketch, a nod to the story I always told about foundations. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just hugged my daughter. My grandson Henry was born on a bright morning in May. He has Elena's eyes. Chloe and I live 10 minutes apart. On Sundays, she brings Henry over and I hold him in the rocking chair by the window. We often drive past the old building, now bustling with new tenants under the Trust's ownership. The company is smaller, leaner, but profitable. It is no longer an empire. It is a going concern, and that is enough. People ask me if I won. I tell them that's the wrong question. The question is, what did you protect? What did you rebuild? I protected my right to say no. I rebuilt a relationship with my daughter, and I learned that the strongest foundation isn't made of concrete or steel or even legal clauses. It's made of the truth you are willing to show and the people who are willing to see it. The building was just a building. The trust was just a tool. The real asset, the one David never understood and almost made me forget, was sitting at my kitchen table that night, willing to look at the evidence. The foundation holds because you maintain it, and sometimes maintaining it means letting the right person in. So what is the real lesson in a story like this? It's tempting to see it as a simple tale of revenge, of a founder pulling a hidden lever to punish an upstart. But that misses the point entirely. This was never about revenge. It was about consequence. It was about the invisible architecture that holds any enterprise together, the legal structures, the documented agreements, the unspoken understandings that exist long before a crisis hits. David's fatal error wasn't ambition. It was negligence. He wanted the crown, but didn't bother to learn the weight of the scepter. He saw the company as a machine to be optimized, and me as a worn-out part to be replaced. He failed to understand that in a family business, the machinery and the soul are often the same thing. You can't change one without understanding the other. The statistics are brutal. Only 30% of family businesses survive the transition to the next generation. And of those that fail, a lack of a clear, documented plan is almost always the root cause. My trust wasn't a secret weapon. It was my plan. A plan David never asked to see. A plan the board, in its rush for clarity, willfully ignored. We had become a statistic in the making. This story asks an uncomfortable question. At what point does prudent control become a prison? Did my need to protect the foundation I built with Elena actually create the very conditions for this explosion? By keeping the building separate, did I signal that I could never truly let go? Perhaps. But here's the harder truth. Letting go is not the same as being pushed. Succession is a negotiated surrender, not a hostile takeover. It requires trust from both sides. And trust cannot exist where there is no transparency. In the end, the building was just a symbol. The real battle was over narrative. Who gets to tell the story of the past and who gets to author the future? David tried to write me out as a stubborn relic. I had to prove I was still the copyright holder. The court of law saw the facts. The court of family eventually saw the heart. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Whether it's a house, a business, or a relationship, know what you own. And more importantly, know how you own it. Read the documents. Understand the clauses. Because when the pressure comes, and it always does, you won't be able to rely on good intentions or family sentiment. You will rely on the foundation you poured when the sun was still shining. For every founder wrestling with letting go, and for every successor chafing at the weight, your story doesn't have to end in a courtroom. It can end at a kitchen table with the blueprints spread out between you. But that requires a courage far greater than any legal maneuver, the courage to be honest and the courage to listen. This has been the story of a foundation tested. Thanks for listening.